Okay, so now we're getting into the stuff that isn't just like it's fun, that's more in the vein of it's actually really good. This next film, I will say, is kind of like A Cure for Wellness in the sense that it's very visually interesting, but everything else isn't too great. The thing here is that I think the plot is great in this film, and I think the writing is okay, but the characters are kind of what's bad about this film. I'm talking about Dave Made a Maze, which some people might disagree that this is a horror film, but it has like horror comedy elements to it. I mean, hell, even I would kind of disagree that this is a horror film, but it's listed as one on many sites, and I found it under horror when I was looking for something to watch on Amazon streaming. And I rented it and I watched it, and I thought it was really good. So essentially, this is a film about a guy named Dave. He makes a cardboard fort in his living room, and it's like a pretty well-made fort, in all honesty. And he's been trapped in there for 3 days, and his friends and everybody, his girlfriend, come into the apartment, and they're like, well, "What the hell are you doing in there, man? Like, you could just come out." And then they realize why he's been trapped in there for 3 days, because as soon as you walk through that fucking door of that cardboard fort, it turns into a giant maze, labyrinth, complete with booby traps and a minotaur, as well as other things. The film was shot using sets made entirely out of cardboard that would take them days to make, and they would only last about 3 hours. So they had to. So if there was a scene that took place in a specific room, and it was like a 10-minute scene, and they wanted to get like near perfect takes, they would have to work with everybody, like everybody working like at their best kind of quality, at their best everybody like on top of their game. Essentially everybody had to be on top of their game because they had only had 3 hours once they finished building this set to do the scene. And you can tell that this film is a labor of love. You can tell like it's like all of the like it's just such a really cool movie because they made all this stuff out of cardboard, and it's complex and it's interesting, and the craftsmanship that went into this film is amazing. It's just terrible that the characters are written like discount Scott Pilgrim characters that are like trying super hard to be quirky and unique and interesting, and it's just kind of cringy, and it hurts my soul to have to say that about a film that from a technical standpoint is this great. I would still really, and also this is the guy who directed this. This is his first film, so for a first film, he pulled like a fucking Orson Welles and made something that like technically is like is amazing, and it's a shame that the characters have to be like that. It's a shame that the writing has to be like that. But that's just the way the world works, and I'm not gonna hold that against film too much because I didn't think it was like so cringy to the point that it made me want to stop watching, although some people, it might be different for some people. I was able to sit through the entire thing, and I found the entire film to be rather enjoyable, even with the characters. But yeah, let's get to the next one, because this is getting out of hand. Alright, next we have a psychological drama thriller horror film from last year that is another one that I like just was interested in seeing, but I kind of held off on for a bit. Excuse me. I held off on seeing it for a bit, and then it hit Netflix, and I was like, alright, I guess I'll watch it. I'm, of course, talking about Super Dark Times. Now, despite the title sounding pretty cheesy, this film and the ending being a little bit over the top, considering the whole tone of the film before that, other than that, this film is actually a pretty great psychological horror film. Essentially about these two best friends in high school in the 90s. And when one of their friends, who's kind of a huge dickhead, accidentally ends up getting killed, they hide his corpse and promise to never talk about it again. And then things get worse and worse as the murder weapon disappears and the body ends up uncovered and other things. It's just really good. I think the acting's really good. I think the two main characters are really likable, and they're pretty believable characters, honestly. I think the film is pretty violent, and surprisingly so. I didn't expect it to get as violent. Like I said, the ending is a little over the top, and with how everything kind of just like with how like the last 10-15 minutes goes and the very ending, it feels a little over the top compared to this very serious kind of somber, creepy tone the first like I think hour and like 10 minutes had of the movie. But I don't think it necessarily ruins the movie. I think it's a decent kind of conclusion to the film, in all honesty. It's not perfect. It's not a perfect film, but I think it's actually a really good, really solid film. It's on Netflix instant streaming, at least here in the U.S. I don't know if it's anywhere else. Maybe, might be. But it's Super Dark Times, the drama thriller kind of high school teen angst horror film. High school. Next, we have another one that I was kind of holding off on seeing, and then I saw it on Netflix, and I was like, you know what, I'll watch it. It's the film A Dark Song. Now, I heard from a couple critical reviews and a couple, not critical reviews, but a couple reviews from just kind of internet critics as well as general audiences who saw it, as well as people in the general audience who saw it, that this film was good fucking dude. That this film was bad, that it wasn't very good, that the ending like ruins the entire film and it makes it absolutely irredeemable. But I think otherwise. I'm talking about the Irish film A Dark Song. This is another one from a first-time director that is actually a really great film. Actually, Super Dark Times is also from a first-time director. So that's another one that's like from a first-time director that's really good. This is another really good debut film. And honestly, this film, as I was watching it up until the last like 5 to 10 minutes, I was really interested, and I was like, man, this movie is like a 9 out of 10. It's creepy, it's interesting, it's foreboding, it doesn't reveal too much. Essentially, it's about a woman who wants to communicate with her dead son, and in doing so, she hires a cultist and rents a giant house, and her and this cultist essentially have to live in this house together for around... There's a fucking yawn. They have to live in this house for like up to 6 months while doing this ritual to summon her guardian angel so he can grant her, so the guardian angel can grant her a wish. And other than the ending, which I feel like is a good ending, it's just the way they did it that kind of killed it. Other than the ending, it was really, honestly, a great horror film with really good atmosphere. The performances I thought were fantastic. And I just really enjoyed the film, and I thought it was really creepy and legitimately good. No, fuck. Up next, we have The Black Coat's Daughter, which premiered in festivals in 2015, but did not get a video-on-demand or limited theatrical release until 2017. The Black Coat's Daughter is a film that I saw on Amazon Prime, and it looked interesting enough. And then I looked on IMDb, and I saw it had like a 5 out of 10 average rating, and I'm like, I don't know. Then I actually watched it, and I'm starting to question why it has a 5 out of 10, because it's definitely of better quality than that. Essentially, The Black Coat's Daughter is a film that jumps between two different timelines without really like kind of telling you what exactly happened between the two timelines until the very end of the film. Essentially, the film is about two girls who are at a boarding school, and when winter break comes and the families come and pick everybody up, these two girls are left by themselves. One of them being a girl who's just like, oh, my parents don't care about me, and the other one being very worried because her parents usually would show up on time. And things escalate, it gets creepy, it gets weird, it gets maybe even supernatural, depending on how you watch the film. I mean, I know there's some people who are like, it's a supernatural film, there's some people who say it's a psychological horror film. Either way, I think it's a very well shot. I think the music's really good. I think the performances are really good. I think the jumping between the two timelines is absolutely amazing. Is an absolutely amazing way to do it. And I just thought it was a really interesting, really great, honestly. Maybe not really great, but like really good film, honestly. Look, what else can I say about a film? All right, I shouldn't have done a top 30. Jesus Christ. Next on the list, we have Creep 2, sequel to the 2014 kind of sleeper hit. Now, Creep, the first Creep came out, and some people liked it, some people hated it. A lot of people, from the looks of it, more people kind of appreciated it than hated it, but the hate I hear for it is very, like, scathing. Essentially, the Creep movies are found footage films, and this second one follows a woman who answers an ad on Craigslist looking for this guy who was looking for a videographer, and this man claims to be a serial killer who's killed many people before, and he wants her to make a documentary about him being a serial killer. It's an interesting film. I think the guy who's the killer, who was like the same guy from the first one, he's doing a bit of a different character this time. I mean, this time he's just straight up like, oh, I'm a serial killer. And I think he does a pretty good job at being creepy, just like in the first film. And you get more of his backstory, whether or not it's true, because you know after watching the first one that this guy's a bit of a pathological liar. You don't know whether this backstory gives the main character is true or not, so you're just kind of iffy on whether or not this is his backstory. But I think it might be his actual true backstory, honestly. Look, just like the first film, it's creepy. I thought it was a really funny horror comedy. It's got charm. I think the acting is pretty good. I think the writing's pretty good. I think even though there are jump scares in the film, they make sense with how the character with how the character behaves. He feels like the kind of character who would go out of his way to like try and jump scare people. It's very, very similar to the first one, but it's not. It tries to do its own thing while still staying true to the kind of formula of the very first film, which is great. That's great. That's something I really appreciate from this film, and I'm really excited for Creep 3 because I know that they were planning on making this a trilogy, and I'm totally down for this being a trilogy because I really like the first Creep. I like this one even more, honestly. Oh, fucking Christ. I'm keeping that in. Okay. Next, we have the one that everybody's putting at number one, the best horror film of the year, but really, this film doesn't deserve number one. I mean, it's a good film, very good quality, it's entertaining, it's interesting enough, and I think there is something more to it than it just being, like, a scary movie. I've heard, like, things about it actually being about cycles of abuse. I'm talking about Stephen King's It. It is the one film that came out this year that everybody was surprised was good. I was surprised it was good. The trailers looked fucking atrocious, but I saw it the weekend it came out and I was surprised. Look, it's a good film. Don't get me wrong. I thought it was really good, bordering on great. But it's nothing amazing. It's a fun movie. It's not actually scary. It's not really about anything else other than it being about a scary clown. Although the theories I've heard about this film being about cycles of abuse is a very interesting kind of take on it, which I could see that, definitely. I'm not going to sit here and say I don't see how this film could be about cycles of abuse. Couldn't be about cycles of abuse. But essentially, if everybody saw it when it came out, and that's the reason I didn't cover it on my channel, because everybody was talking about it. So, it, based on the Stephen King novel, essentially a bunch of kids in the 50s, well, in the book it's the 50s, in the movie it's the 80s, encounter a shape-shifting, interdimensional cosmic being known that calls itself Pennywise, and it chooses the form of a clown. Now, when I first saw Bill Skarsgård as Pennywise, I was very concerned because it looked like they were trying to make him so creepy that he bounced off the wall, and he wasn't. Surprisingly, though, Bill Skarsgård did a great job as Pennywise. I'm not going to sit here and bullshit. I think he did a really good job. And I'm yawning again. I fucking hate my life. Okay. It was really well put together film, really well acted. I felt like the fucking kid from Stranger Things that was in it kind of ruined every single scene he was in, honestly. Not that his scenes were like... Not that he ruined the film entirely. I thought he was a pretty interesting, funny character. But, like, there's a specific scene where they're all talking about how they've seen this clown, and it's like the music's building up, it's getting creepy, it's actually building some kind of atmosphere. And then he makes a joke which derails that fucking atmosphere instantly, which ruins it. And that's something that you don't want in your film. You don't want to ruin something you're working to set up, which is what this film did to itself many times because of the character of Richie. I'm not saying it wasn't good, because it was. I'm just saying it's not the best horror film of the year, not even by a long shot. There were a few other movies that I'm about to talk about that were better than it, let me tell you. Okay, next we had one of the only zombie films that came out this year. I'm talking about The Girl with All the Gifts. This is another one that I kind of held off on watching because I had heard good things about it. I had heard good things about this film. But at the same time, I had heard a couple mixed things, and I held off on watching it for the longest time, and I'm happy I got around to watching it. Essentially, The Girl with All the Gifts is a non-traditional zombie film, and I appreciate it when zombie films try to do something different, when they try to do something that is against the norm of the genre, which is why, even though it's not necessarily a good movie, I appreciate something like Warm Bodies. I thought Warm Bodies was actually a pretty funny kind of horror comedy. Even if it isn't like a good zombie movie, it's still entertaining enough and it did its own thing. So The Girl with All the Gifts is essentially set in a dystopian future where all the children that have currently that have been born with this zombie virus, but they only want to attack people when they smell when they smell natural human, like when they get the smell of a natural human, which is why that the humans that do exist, the adults that are around, have to wear this blocker gel on their skin in order to keep that scent suppressed, so that way these children do not go rabid. And it's a very interesting film, honestly. It's very well acted. I thought the acting was good. I thought it was pretty well paced. I feel like the ending is a kind of dark yet hopeful ending that I really liked. But at the same time, I really liked it. I think it works with the film. But at the same time, I don't think anybody else is going to like the ending with The Girl with All the Gifts. I really don't know what else to say. It was very well acted. It was interesting. I thought the characters were likable. I thought it was an interesting take on the zombie genre. And it was entertaining. Yeah. That's all I have to say about that. Next movie. Next, we have another film that is this is actually a film from the first-time director, just like a couple other movies on this list, Hounds of Love. Hounds of Love I've found on, Hulu, and I had heard about this film, and I'd seen trailers for it. It looked interesting as hell. It's essentially a film based in the 70s in Australia, and it's a kind of kidnapping, psychological thriller horror film, essentially about a teenage girl who's kidnapped by this couple who likes to play weird sex games, and tensions grow between the couple, and yada 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 shit happens. Needless to say, I think, and not needless to say, but I think the performances in this film are really good, and it's a really distressing, upsetting, realistic, gritty portrayal of like the kind of dark things that can happen when teenagers are kidnapped. It's decently explicit, and like I said, the performances from the actors, from the teenage girl actor from the girl who was the teenage girl, the victim, she was very good in the film. She did a very good job portraying the character, and I feel like the couple, the acting there was like really fucking intense. Like a couple scenes were really like heart racing level of intense. I had heard some critiques that the film was a little over the top. I didn't feel like the film was over the top at all. It's definitely depressing. It's definitely kind of depressing, and it's definitely a film I would say for anybody with a more mainstream taste. This film is disturbing, definitely, by mainstream kind of standards. By my standards, I didn't really find it to be that disturbing personally, but I can see why people would would want to avoid this film. Honestly, it's a nasty little flick, honestly. Next, we have Jordan Peele's Get Out. Get Out was a film that I was a little skeptical about, honestly. I saw the trailer and I was like, this looks interesting. Then I saw who was directing it, and I was instantly on board. But I was still kind of wary. I went to see Get Out like the weekend it came out, and I was legitimately surprised by how great of like a dark comedy horror film it was. Essentially, Get Out is about this guy who goes to visit his girlfriend's parents, and it turns out that like his girlfriend's parents and all their friends like are up to some mysterious shit. I really don't want to spoil anything that happens in it because it's really great. Honestly, it's a great film, great psychological horror film. But at the same time, it's like it's a great psychological horror film. But at the same time, for me to explain why it's so great would be to spoil the film. I know a lot of people saw this film, saw the trailers, and were like, "Oh, look, this is a film trying to make all white people look racist." And I'll make it known right now, this film doesn't do that. And this film isn't just about straight-up racism like a lot of people thought. This film is actually about liberal racism. For those of you who don't know, I don't like to get into race and politics on my channel too much, but I will explain this. Liberal racism is essentially people who have fairly liberal ideals and say that they're not racist, but in actuality they are. People who try so hard to be like, no, I'm not racist. I'm not racist. What are you talking about? I love Morgan Freeman. What are you talking about? I'm not racist. Just try their hardest to prove that they're not racist. It's about those kinds of people who are racist and try so hard to prove that they're not, that it's obvious that they are. That's what this film is about. That's part of what this film is about, and it goes a lot deeper than that. All I'm saying is, Get Out was like legit great, and if you didn't see it, see it. Next, we have a film that this is another one I was holding out on seeing, holding out on making this list until I saw it. Guillermo del Toro's The Shape of Water. When I heard about The Shape of Water, I was like, you're telling me I get to see Sally Hawkins fuck a fish man? I'm on board! Now, a lot of people would argue this isn't really much of a horror film, but it's got a fish man, and there are a couple fairly violent scenes in it, and I would also argue that the fish man might be scary to some people, so I'm going to go ahead and say this is a horror film. This is a monster movie. Essentially, The Shape of Water is a film about a mute woman who works in a government lab in the 1950s. I will say, one of the great things about this movie is the visual aspect. It catches, like, it captures the kind of innocence, the kind of era of innocence 50s feel, like, perfectly. And that's something I really love about it. But essentially, this film is about a woman who's mute. She works in a government laboratory, cleaning up messes, cleaning the bathroom, shit like that. And then they bring a fucking fish man into the laboratory, who she then tries to communicate with and falls in love with. That's the movie. There's other stuff going on, which I don't want to get into. And this is definitely, like, Guillermo del Toro's best film since Crimson Peak. But I'm kind of a Del Toro fanboy, honestly. I'm not going to sit here and bullshit you on that. I love Guillermo del Toro's films. Whether it be The Devil's Backbone, Pan's Labyrinth, Hellboy, Crimson Peak. Like, a lot of people thought Crimson Peak was kind of cliche, but it's kind of trying to be a callback to old, kind of like giallo haunted house movies from Italy from the 70s and 60s. Stuff like Mario Bava's movies specifically. So for it to be cliche is like kind of the point to an extent. I thought Crimson Peak was great, and I give that one like a 9 out of 10, and I give like The Shape of Water a 9 out of 10. It's a really great film, and yeah, definitely one of Del Toro's best since Pan's Labyrinth. Up next, here's one that nobody saw, but the people who saw it hated it. Darren Aronofsky's Mother. A film I think is absolutely fucking brilliant, honestly. Darren Aronofsky's Mother is essentially this weird, like, hypothetical, political, lyrical Miracle Whip kind of movie. That I'm not going to spoil what it's actually about, but I'm just going to say right now, it's a weird, interesting art film, about a woman and her husband living in this house, and she's like kind of trying to restore this house, and she loves this house, and then suddenly two people show up thinking it was a bed and breakfast, and her husband's like, well, you can stay. And then it turns out that these two people were actually fans of her husband's work, which he was a poet. And then the sons of this couple show up at the house, and things start to escalate. It's like I said, it's hypothetical, political, lyrical, Miracle Whip kind of movie. It's a film that not many people liked when it came out. Like, I'm not even joking when I say I told somebody about it. I told somebody my thoughts on it, and they said to me, so you're one of the 10 people that liked that movie. I'm like, yeah. I honestly really liked Mother. I thought it was great. It's very interesting. It's got a good atmosphere. It's pretty shocking. There are quite a few scenes I didn't expect to get that dark and weird and fucked up. Oh, God. Fucking kill me. It had a good atmosphere, like I said. Like I've already said, probably 3 times. And the camera work was one of the best things about the film, because the camera work is it was shot in 16mm, first of all. And second of all, it's very in your face. Like, a lot of the shots where characters are talking, it doesn't leave much in the ways of stuff in the background. Their whole face is the kind of focal point of the shot, which really makes you feel claustrophobic. It makes you feel like you're there almost. The sound design in this film I also think is really good. There are quite a few scenes where I noticed like little things with the sound design that, like, in a mainstream film or in a mainstream, specifically a mainstream horror film, they wouldn't pay this much attention to the sound design of the film. But they did in this film. This is honestly my favorite Darren Aronofsky film. I really like Pi, and I really like Requiem for a Dream, don't get me wrong, and I think Black Swan's good for what it is, but I think Mother is Aronofsky's masterpiece, honestly. It's horror with a point. Okay, final stretch. At the number 4 spot, we have It Comes at Night. Another film that got a pretty wide release, even though it's a film that's, like, very much not for a mainstream audience. The big problem with this film that people have is that, quote-unquote, nothing happens. People had this problem with the Blair Witch Project when it came out. Here's the thing. It's not that nothing happens, it's that mainstream audiences have become so used to watered down popcorn film garbage that anything that isn't that is automatically pretentious or boring. It Comes at Night was also falsely advertised. The ads made it out to look like a supernatural horror film, which is what everybody expected it to be. And everybody was disappointed to find out that this is actually a post-apocalyptic film. I personally don't have a problem with it being a post-apocalyptic film. I think it's a great piece of cinema. I think it's legitimately interesting, compelling, creepy, and with the last, 20 minutes of the film, a very intense piece of, kind of psychological horror, post-apocalyptic horror cinema. There are scenes that are that are surreal and weird, that are dream sequences of the main character, and a lot of people complained why is that in the film? It doesn't add anything, and I can see why people would complain about that, but at the same time, it's interesting. It's not like it's just a shot of a blank wall with paint drying. There are things happening. And I think it kind of gives you a peek into the psyche of the main character and what kind of mental state he's in with some of these nightmares he's having. I don't know. I thought It Comes at Night was legitimately great, and I also didn't see any of the trailers when the trailers dropped, honestly. So I didn't see the trailers and think this is going to be a supernatural horror film. But I think it's a great film. I think it's brilliant. I think it's really amazing. But people seem to think otherwise. I don't know. Alright, here we go. With one of the best films I saw in theaters this year. The Void. The Void is a film that for some reason is getting a decent amount of low ratings and hate. And here's the thing. It doesn't serve it. Sure, the acting isn't the absolute best. Sure, the characters aren't the most fleshed out. But the atmosphere, the camera work, the lighting, the music, the practical monster and gore effects are all beyond above the average level of what you would see in a mainstream horror film. It's essentially a weird, fucked up film inspired by a combination of Hellraiser, Lucio Fulci's The Beyond, and The Thing. If that doesn't get you excited to see a horror film, I don't know what else can. And the ending is very much obviously a reference to Lucio Fulci's The Beyond. If you watch that film and watch The Beyond, the ending is very similar. Essentially, it's about these people who show up at this understaffed hospital. This police officer shows up at this understaffed hospital with this guy that they found covered in blood on the side of the road, claiming that he just narrowly escaped being killed by some crazy rednecks. And then the rednecks show up at the hospital, and people start going crazy, and then Lovecraftian fucked up horror monsters from another dimension show up, and it's crazy, violent, and very visually pleasing to the eye. Holy shit. This movie is a theatrical experience. I got the chance to see this on the big screen, and I was so thankful that I got that chance. There's actually... I don't think it's, don't think it is around here. Let me just grab some. Pardon me for like 5 seconds while I grab this thing. And when I went to see it, when me and my friends went to see it and we bought our tickets, they gave us a free pen with the tickets. That's, The Void. There is a hell. This place is worse. Look at this. It's fucking beautiful. And this was a freebie. They gave this away free with tickets. You have no idea how happy I am that I have this beautiful, beautiful piece of memorabilia. The Void is a great horror film, and it's one that doesn't deserve the hate and low ratings that it's getting. It's, like, yeah, it's just an excuse to show practical, really crazy, complicated practical gore and monster effects. But so was fucking The Thing. Like, the writing in John Carpenter's The Thing isn't the absolute pinnacle of writing in horror films, and the characters aren't completely fleshed out, yet that film is considered to be a classic. This film is, and that film was hated at when it came out. I get a feeling that The Void will be the same way, almost. Hopefully. Let's get down to the last 2 films on the list. These last 2 films were films I actually reviewed on my channel, so I'm going to try and keep it short. At the number 2 spot, second best horror film of the year, Raw. Raw was... wow, was Raw really great. This film came out in... well, this film got a... premiered at festivals last year. Well, not last year, 2016, I should say. It didn't get a limited theatrical release or video-on-demand release until 2017. This film, when it hit, I think, like, Sweden, at a festival in Sweden, it might have been it might have been somewhere else. People were fainting and passing out. People were fainting and vomiting during the film, and they were giving out vomit bags with the film. And I love gimmicky old shit like that. I love all that old William Castle gimmick shit. I live for that, like, you know, this movie made people pass out kind of old school shit like that. Especially when it's with an actual, like, especially when it's with a film that is actually of some level of quality. Not when it's like how, in 2016, somebody apparently died while watching, The Conjuring 2. Like, I don't like it when the sensationalism, and then apparently his body disappeared. Now, yeah, that's very sad, but they use that as sensationalism to drive up ticket sales. I don't like it when they do that. Not just profiting off somebody's death, but, like, just using that as an example. They like, when they do that with mainstream film, I don't really like it that much. But when they do it with an independent, actually, like, gory and violent and crazy horror film, that's when I really like it. Raw is essentially about a young girl who's a vegetarian. She goes to a veterinary school, and as a hazing ritual, they make her eat raw rabbit kidneys. She then gets sick and develops a craving for human flesh. That's the plot of this film. It's kind of a metaphorical film, with her craving human flesh being a metaphor for female sexual awakening. I thought this film was very well acted. I thought it was very well thought out. I didn't feel like the aspect of it being like a girl who becomes a cannibal was like... it didn't feel too forced in, or too... it didn't feel like they were trying to force this kind of premise. It felt kind of realistic in a way. I don't know how to put it into words. Essentially what I'm saying is that Raw, also known as Grave, which was the original title, is like one of the best films I saw this past year. And there was only one other film that I also reviewed on my channel that I would say is better. On last year's list, I put Yorgos Lanthimos' film The Lobster. Now, Yorgos Lanthimos has never technically directed a horror film, but I called The Lobster a horror film because I felt like it was a dark, depressing enough film. Here we are this year, well, last year, with his first actual film within the horror genre, The Killing of a Sacred Deer. This is another one that people are that general audiences who at least end up seeing this film hate because it's different, because it's artful, because it's interesting. Essentially, this is a film about a cardiologist who takes a young boy, a young poor kid, under his wing because this kid wants to be a cardiologist as well. And it turns out that this kid is kind of a sociopath. This film is very much off. Everything is very slightly off kilter. Like, you don't know why, but, like, characters are weird for some reason. There are certain things that are, like, implied that really get under your skin. And to a mainstream audience, this would be like, oh, this movie's just bad. But to somebody who appreciates absurdism and absurdist humor, this is like an absurdist black comedy horror film, really. It's brilliant. It really is. The kid who plays the sociopathic teenager Martin, he is absolutely fantastic, and he gives one of the best performances of a sociopathic character I've seen in cinema in a very long time. His acting is amazing in this film. Colin Farrell and Nicole Kidman also star in this film, and they do a great job. Really, everybody in the cast does a fantastic job. The music in this film is amazing. The cinematography is like Kubrickian levels of perfect, and you can tell Yorgos has a hard-on for Kubrick. And let's be honest here, if you don't have a hard-on for Kubrick, you're kind of wrong, honestly. It's an uncomfortable, absurdist humor, weird experience. And it is the only film I saw this year that legitimately made me kind of squirm in my seat. It made me feel uncomfortable. It made me feel uneasy. And I thankfully got the chance to see it in the theater. And let me tell you, as a theatrical experience, this film is quite the fucking experience. I don't know what else to say other than that is it. Yorgos Lanthimos' The Killing of a Sacred Deer is the best horror film from this year. I know people will disagree with me on that, because I know that there are people who don't like Lanthimos' films, but I think this is probably his best film, honestly. With The Lobster being a close second, and The Lobster and Dogtooth like tied for second, honestly, because Dogtooth is really great as well. Anyway, guys, this is Biscuit Boo Horror Reviews, signing off. Peace.